Hey guys, I'm Ed Bolian and welcome back to my personal channel. We're here this evening to actually say goodbye to the most reliable car I've ever owned, my 2009 Ferrari 430 Scuderia. Now that may sound insane that the most reliable car I've ever owned happens to be a Ferrari, and also crazy that I might decide to sell it, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about why the ownership has been so great and why it's time to try something new. But before we do that, I want to thank our current VinWiki sponsor, Glossit. Glossit makes some world-class and industry-leading detailing products, and their special right now for VinWiki viewers and for viewers of this channel is for just $69.99, you get their graphene ceramic coating. Normally it's $150, and in addition to that, they're giving you the real difference maker for DIY application. They're giving you their ceramic detail spray, a $50 product, as well as an applicator, all for just $69.99. Now, it's something that makes an idiot like me capable of achieving a world-class finish, because when you use a ceramic detail spray to remove the coating, you avoid high spots, it comes off a lot more smoothly, and you achieve a much better outcome. So be sure to check it out now at the link in the description below. But let's talk a little bit more about my Ferrari 430 Scuderia. Now, Ferrari has the tradition of making an end-of-run version of their V8 car that's kind of the road version of the racing version of the road version of the car. They did it first with the Ferrari 348 Serie Speciale, then with the 355 Fiorano Spiders, obviously with the legendary Challenge Stradale, the Scuderia, the Speciale, and the Pista. And they're always really, really special cars with a few amazing tweaks that really turn them into a totally different experience in driving and sitting in, and really in perceiving what the car is. You get better aerodynamics, a little bit less weight, a little bit more power, a little bit of a different look, sometimes some graphics or stripes, a way cooler interior, and that's really why I love the 430 Scuderia. Plenty of people could argue that the Challenge Stradale is actually a prettier car, and I would probably concede that, but the power delivery, the maintainability, and especially the interior quality of the Scud makes that the best one to have. Now, when I was growing up, I always dreamt of owning a Ferrari, honestly, even more than owning a Lamborghini. But when I really thought about which one to kind of lust after and to dream of, honestly, the Scud always stood out. I remember going to the launch in 2007 for the car, which was a model year 2008 in the United States, and just thinking, holy cow, that was amazing. Now, this car had an original MSRP of $315,000. It has almost every option, including the $8,500 stripe. It's the tricolore Italian flag stripe that was only available in 2009. This car is Grigio Silverstone over a full red leather interior rather than the normal Alcantara and technical fabric that you'll see on a lot of Scuds. Now, I bought this car back in 2019 from Metrolina, also known as McLaren Charlotte, and it had at one point been like a Fab Speed test car, but it was totally stock. But when I showed up, the car was mostly repainted. At least the entire driver's side had been repainted. It was several different shades of gray, but mechanically, the car was really solid. I'd actually tried to buy the car a few years prior when it was at McLaren Beverly Hills. So I've always been a sucker for gray over red Ferraris, especially since I saw the world speed records set by the 1997 Ferrari 550 Maranello. That was a Grigio Titania over Bordeaux car, racing seats, awesome. It was actually a Saudi car that is owned by Ferrari of Atlanta now. But they haven't let me buy that, so when I saw this, it just seemed perfect. And at the time, the Verde Draco Mercy was still down for paint. That 10-month process was very much still ongoing at that point, and I needed a car for Lux Rally. And when I think about what makes me feel like I've owned and experienced a car, there's a few things that really, kind of rise to the surface. And one is an epic long road trip. I also want to go to some great mountain driving roads. I want to take some really great pictures of the car. I want to let a lot of friends experience it. And at this point, honestly, I've done all those things. Shmi was here and drove it, Seen Through Glass, That Dude in Blue, countless others. It's been on the Esoteric Detailing channel with them completely redoing the paintwork, making sure it looked world class, and they did a wonderful job. When I bought the car, it had about 28,000 miles, and today it's at about 43,000 miles, and I put 6,000 miles of that on in the first week doing that Lux Rally event. I've taken it on Gold Rush, I've taken it to car shows, Caffeine and Octane, all the things, and honestly, it has just been bulletproof. And that's why I've driven it so much. To be quite honest, it's not a great road trip car. The seats, while they fit really nicely and I can sit up pretty much straight, I love the car for that, but you can only sit in that position. If you try to adjust or shift your weight, it doesn't work that way. So after, a 5 or 10 hour road trip, my shoulders are hurting, everything's a little bit sore. There's not a lot of sound deadening. It's pretty loud, but it is always there to depend on. So all I've really had to do is the occasional oil change. I had to replace one switch. I had to just recently replace one of the catalytic converters, and thank goodness Art from EAG, Exotic Auto Group out in San Antonio, came through with a set of OEM cats. In the process of selling the car, which I have already done, it had a check engine light on, and the buyer really wanted it to be off. Now, I offered that we could just delete the cats and sort of tune out the codes, but he wanted it to be as OEM as possible, and we were able to achieve that thanks to the team at EAG. You'll know them for their legendary manual swapped cars, and plenty of you have asked, Ed, why haven't you stick swapped the car? And the real answer is, it hasn't broken. Now, if I were to lose an F1 pump or a shift actuator or something like that, it would certainly make sense, because for about 30 grand, you could turn the car into a manual. Ferrari never sold the Scud as a manual, same with the Stradale, but it is a great car to drive. I was able to drive their very first car that they did, which happened to be a 430 Scuderia that was at Lamborghini Atlanta when I started to work there, that had been repossessed from the owner, that had been financed by Premier Financial Services, one of our VinWiki sponsors. And so I loved driving that car, and I always thought, if something really bad breaks, that's an easy decision. But the car honestly works really, really well as an F1. Now, I first started to consider selling the car back about, early last year when we were doing Car Trek 4, because I was in the process of buying my flood-titled 2007 599. Also Grigio Silverstone with a red interior. And they were very, very similar. Now, obviously, the jagged edge performance and handling of the Scud is better, but the road manners and the comfort on a long trip, the 599 was pretty awesome. Of course, I ended up deciding not to do that at the time. I eventually sold the 599, but I've kind of had all the adventures in this car. And while I view it absolutely as the perfect complement to an LP640, because the big, extreme, garish, outrageous Mercy is not necessarily the scalpel you want to carve up a perfect mountain road, and it's not exactly the easiest and most comfortable car to just hop in and go 5 or 10 miles down the road, I loved the Scud there. And so I think I still want to find a more reliable, more agile, easier and more approachable car like the Scud, but I've had my fun with this car. 15,000 miles and 3 years later, it's time to try something new. But before we do that, let's take it for a drive. Come on. There's nothing like a Ferrari cold start. Unfortunately, it cold starts in automatic, so every single time you have to press auto to get it the way it should be. Now, one thing you immediately notice and love about a Scuderia is the shifting. And as somebody who loves manual cars, that may sound strange, but of single clutch, sequential manual cars, there's really nothing better than the way it works in this car. In race, in high RPM shifts, it is wonderful. But if you relax, if you let off the throttle a little bit during the shifts, it's smooth enough that a passenger doesn't get offended. I'd say even relative to the pretty similar mechanically single clutch sequential in the SV, this is better. It's the best one that I have driven. And the car is a really nice place to be. The seats are stiff, but they fit me well. I can sit up pretty much straight, even if I couldn't quite wear a helmet sitting up straight. You can see everything. There's a lot of room. It's a great layout. And if you stack it up next to a Gallardo of a similar era, even a McLaren 12C 650, I'd say even a 720, I love everything that this car is and does. I'd also go on to say that I think this is the best Ferrari that you could buy for less than 500 grand today. Now, obviously, in the last 3 years, like most interesting and exotic cars, this has gone up in value a good bit, and so it does carry a negative ownership cost. I mean, it's made me money, and I think all in for 3 services, I had to replace some motor mounts, had to fix this switch that turns that light on, had to replace the catalytic converters, just some miscellaneous stuff, one set of of tires. I've probably spent about $20,000 total owning it. Again, in 15,000 miles, it hasn't been all that expensive to insure. Nothing has really been surprising or unpleasant about owning the car. Now, of course, like most exotic and interesting cars over the last few years, it has gone up in value, so I did make money on the car even after paying to own it. But I'll say, even if it was worth less than what I paid for it back in 2019, I would still be over the moon ecstatic with the ownership experience. Because like I said, every single time I needed it, it was right there, ready to go. Last year, we took the Paris Hilton SLR on the first leg of Gold Rush with Arnie Toman, and the air conditioning stopped working, and the fuel pump stopped working, and it smelled awful. And so when I had to do the second leg with my wife, she was not going to ride in that car, and I was getting pretty tired of how hot it was. And so we just swapped into this thing, and it was perfect. Honestly, the only thing it's ever done was grow a little bit of mold under the seats when I couldn't drive it enough. And so it's a car that I probably could have put another 30 or 40,000 miles on trouble-free. Now, when you're inside a Scud, you immediately notice what differentiates it from a 430. Obviously, you can get the LED carbon wheel on a 430, but you can't get these carbon fiber door cards. You don't see out through these carbon fiber mirrors. The racing seats are different, even if you do get the sport seats in the regular car. Carbon center tunnel, a very, very different architecture. No carpets, no sound deadening. It's a very, very different thing, and it's very much a race car for the street. Now, as Matt Ferris says, honestly, it's a lot of race car theater. It is still truly a road car, and I like it for that because it makes me feel like I'm in something super special because it is that special, but it's also, again, not offensive to drive over bad surfaces and things like that. I've had it well over 190 miles per hour. I've had it all over the country, all over the place, and I've never had to worry about a thing. The aerodynamics are good, the brakes are phenomenal, the suspension dampening is magically fantastic. Like I said, everything that a Mercy isn't in terms of being a sports car, this is. And so that's where they complement so well. And I think I'm going to look for a while before I find something that replaces it in that way. That being said, I do find myself craving something a little bit more comfortable for short daily trips and super long road trips. I've been thinking about maybe an R8, maybe more of a GT Ferrari, an F12, an 812, something like that. Honestly, maybe even a Porsche of some sort, maybe a later turbo, something like that. I mean, keep in mind, I have never daily driven a car that even had a reliable backup camera, much less parking sensors or functional Bluetooth or anything like that. And I don't miss it in something like an LP640, but I do acknowledge that there's some nice things to say about cars that have a bit more technology than 15-year-old exotic cars. Now, in the 15,000 miles that I've owned it, and all the miles and all the places, I have never turned the radio on, so I don't even know if these speakers behind me work, but the sound that the engine makes is really, really good. I always preferred the 360 to the 430, but the tweaking in the exhaust that you get out of the 530 horsepower V8, the Scud, I think is really, really wonderful. I would even go so far to say a 355 with a 2B sounds better than all of them, but regardless, it is a Ferrari, and it is distinctively a Ferrari. I can't say that as much about the new crop of Ferraris. Obviously, it's got one of the best brand identities in the entire world, but when I think about a Ferrari, I think about this. I think about seeing the engine through a wide open rear glass. I think about this view from the front. I think about the dimensions, the silhouette, everything about a 360 430 is quintessentially Ferrari to me. Now, of course, that has something to do with how old I was and how impressionable I was when these cars were new, but that's a good thing. That means that this car fulfills more of my Ferrari fantasy than, say, a 488 or an F8 or something like that. But I am starting to see that there could be some appeal to a newer supercar, and I'm kind of excited to, I don't know, find one of those to take on some form of a journey. I think about this being my last drive in the car. The same thing happens every time I drive this car. You get into it and you just remember, holy cow, This thing is great. 42,770 miles on it. Not the highest mileage Scud in the world, but not too far from it. There are some ex-track rental cars that have racked up 60 or 70,000 miles. There's plenty of people that have miled them up, but honestly, it's not squeaky, it's not rattly, it feels very well put together. And for a car that lacks a lot of the things that civilize a normal V8 Ferrari, that's saying a lot. So am I going to miss this car? Of course I'm going to miss it, but at the same time, I've had the experiences. I've owned it, I've done all the things I wanted to do. I know that I've experienced it in a better and more fulfilling way than anybody else who's ever been behind the seat of this one, and probably anybody who's had one at all. And so I think as I look back, it will most certainly be as fondly as I've ever looked back on a car that went across the curb to somebody else's home after that. I have to say, it has been a perfect companion for many, many road trips, and I can't wait to follow it on VinWiki and see where it ends up from here. I don't know exactly what's going to replace it in the garage, but I can't wait to shop to find out. So it's time to head on over to Auto Tempest and see what's next. After a little more of that. So in a few days, this one is off to a new home, and I have had plenty of miles and plenty of memories to absolutely never forget it. I might own another one at some point, but something new will come to replace this one here before too terribly long. And I'm at least 70% sure that it's not going to be a fourth Mercy. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great night.